There are many ways to refer to the community who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, questioning, intersex and others. You may have heard the abbreviation of LGBTQI+. In this video, for simplicity, I'm going to use LGBT to refer to this community. Lizzie Lowe took her life in a forgotten patch of farmland behind the River Mersey on the 10th of September 2014. It isn't possible for me to adequately convey the explosion of grief and dismay that hit the Lowes, the church, her school, and her wider network of family and friends, said the Reverend Nick Bundock from St James in the Manual in Didsbury. Lizzie only lived a few miles from where I volunteer as a youth worker in Manchester, and my own teenage children go to school. I realised soon after I'd heard about that tragedy that I had a friend whose daughter was in the same year and school as Lizzie. And my connections extended as well when I discovered that a friend of mine was also a member of that church. The Reverend Nick continues here. He says, 2 years on from the tragedy, we're still wrestling with Lizzie's death. She would be 16 by now, and no doubt excelling at her A-level studies. The litany of what-ifs is literally overwhelming. Lizzie Lowe was gay. Nobody in her family or church knew this. How we wish we had. As a 14-year-old girl, she was still exploring her feelings and trying to juggle the many powerful emotions of the teenage years. But it was painfully clear from the coroner's hearing that her sexuality and her perception of faith were at odds with one another and had become a chasm too wide to cross. Liz had become convinced that God couldn't love her the way she was, a feeling she expressed by a text message to the few confidants she had leading up to her fatal decision. Even if no one had explicitly said it, and even if it wasn't the case, Lizzie had picked up the distinct feeling that she was not accepted. I wanted to do something about it for other young people, so I offered to do some training for youth workers in our region, and for me that began a process of intentionally thinking about how we support teenagers who identify as LGBT, which I present briefly here in this video. St James and Emmanuel Church has undergone a revolution since Lizzie died, and has taken steps to become an inclusive and a visible church, and I'm grateful for all that they've taught me as a community, as have many other colleagues on my journey. This talk is not about God or the church order relating to the LGBT community. It's purely about the way, as youth and children's workers, we can respond to young people pastorally, and ways of supporting our young people in church in a kingdom way, so that they may have a far better outcome than Lizzie did. Don't worry if you're not familiar with all the terms I use in this video. We've got a link which is available in the information and resources with this video, made by young people, that explains a lot about LGBT community. The stats are scary. According to 2017's study looking at the experience of LGBT pupils in schools and colleges across the UK, nearly half of LGBT pupils, that's 45%, including 64% of trans pupils, are bullied for being LGBT in Britain's schools. Half of LGBT pupils hear homophobic slurs frequently or often at school. More than 8 out of 10 trans young people have self-harmed, as of 6 in 10 lesbian, gay and bi young people who aren't trans. More than 4 in 10 trans young people have attempted to take their own life, double that of the 2 in 10 lesbian, gay and bi students who aren't trans who have also tried to do the same. Thankfully, after hearing those worrying stats, there has been quite a change in attitudes and approaches from the church to the LGBT community over the past few years. In an interview with an American magazine, Pope Francis revealed his pastoral approach to the LGBT community. He said this: "A person once asked me in a provocative manner if I approved of homosexuality. I replied with another question. Tell me, when God looks at a gay person, does he endorse the existence of this person with love or reject and condemn this person? We must always consider the person. Here we enter into the mystery of the human being." So how do we approach especially young people in love? And how should we welcome and pastor all teams as part of our groups? A lot of work on leadership says that a primary role of a leader should be to make those who follow them feel safe. It's a basic human requirement. Nick Elio says that the church needs to be the safest place for all teens. all teens, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, to come process and figure out life. For everyone, part of figuring out life is figuring out where they fit on the sexuality spectrum. One of the most important things you can do is to make it a subject you intentionally talk about. Unless young people know that they'll be safe to talk about LGBT issues in your church, then how will they know that the subject isn't taboo? Often what we don't talk about says more about us than what we do. At least 2 recent research pieces in church have found that young people want to talk about LGBT issues, often far higher than leaders thinking it is an issue that young people want to discuss. 3Generate, the Methodist Children and Youth Assembly, have regularly reminded the wider church of the need to keep talking about this issue. So it will help all young people to give opportunities and be proactive to talk about the possibility that LGBT teens or children may be in your church and discuss it so that they feel that it is a topic that your church will engage in dialogue around. So what if a young person trusts you enough to come out as part of the LGBT community? Then we think these points will help. First of all, watch your face. Whatever you are thinking or whatever you are expecting that young person to say, smile and respond in a supportive way to the young person. Be explicit in thanking a young person for sharing with you what they have. They must have used a lot of emotional energy to have spoken to you. Ask what it means to them. Don't make assumptions. And then ask more questions than talking, without interrogating them, and try and learn more, but don't ask personal questions. For example, have you told anyone else this? Don't expect to have all the answers, and don't be afraid to say that you have to go away and find out some more. And make sure that those young people go away knowing this, that they are still loved by God, that you share in that love and welcome them in the church, and that they can come back at any point. Be honest if you're struggling, and say so, but agree to work through this together. I'm very grateful to support and conversations I've had from a friend and colleague, Gemma Dunning. The loving and faithful way that she's responded to young people in the LGBT community has inspired me, and her words around thanking a young person who has taken that bold step, but also emphasising what a big deal this is for them. She says this, she says, disclosing a deeply personal truth to someone who sits in a place of power and position over them takes an awful lot of courage. So more on pastoring LGBT young people. It's very sad, but if you feel that your young person may not feel welcome with the public knowledge of their LGBT identity in your church, and you believe it would be best to refer them to another congregation that is safe and welcoming, then there is support from the Methodist Church. You can visit Dignity and Worth or Outcome Online. There are other networks too, such as a network of Inclusive Church or Visible Congregation. If young people stay around in your youth work or ministry, and hopefully they do, then these other suggestions might be helpful. Continue to welcome them. Our language should be inclusive. For example, when meeting with a transgender young person, ask them what their preferred name is and what gender and pronouns they would like you to use. Help them feel safe. Have you got their back? And if someone says something out of order, will you challenge that in the same way you would as if someone said something else deliberately harmful? Use inclusive language and don't make assumptions about gender and sexual orientation. This would be relevant for all ages, not just with young people, modelling appropriate language such as partner rather than husband and wife. Show an interest in all aspects of the young person's life as well, not just their LGBT status. You don't only talk to young people about their sex life or their relationships, and don't ignore ordinary feelings, learning, opportunities, wins and struggles. So may our responses to young people, our language, our actions, be full of the love and grace that Jesus used when he responded to all people.